Perhaps you've never considered that a single prayer, whispered on one specific day, could open the gates of heaven wider than usual. Yet Saint Teresa of Ávila knew that time is not all equal. Some days carry a mysterious tenderness in the heart of God, and October 15th, her feast day, is one of them. The saints are not gone, they are more alive than ever. On their feast days, the Church says the veil between heaven and earth thins, and grace rushes in like morning light through a half-open window. Teresa herself once said that when a soul remembers the friends of God, those friends are allowed to act with special power on our behalf. So imagine this: a moment when Teresa walks beside you, unseen but not absent, listening to the desires you can barely put into words. She, who spent her life teaching souls how to pray, now turns toward you and says, "Let us begin again, for even now God waits for you." This day is not merely the anniversary of her death. It is her birthday into eternity, when she was finally united with the one she loved beyond measure. And she does not celebrate alone. Every October 15th, heaven remembers the woman who taught the world to find God within. And heaven listens more closely to those who speak her name. Maybe your prayer life feels dry, distracted, or heavy lately. Maybe you've been waiting for a sign that God still hears you. Teresa would tell you, don't wait for feelings. Begin with faith. Speak to her as to a trusted friend. She will take your prayer, polish it with her love, and place it directly into the hands of Jesus. Because on her feast day, Saint Teresa's voice carries far. And when you pray with her, even the smallest act of trust becomes a doorway through which divine grace can enter your life. Tomorrow I'll tell you what happens when you say her prayer, and why October 15th is unlike any other day of the year. But first, pause, breathe, and let your heart whisper even now, Saint Teresa of Jesus, teach me how to begin again. Long before she was called saint, Teresa was simply a woman who could not silence her longing for God. She lived in a century of noise, conflict, and distraction, not so different from ours, and yet her heart burned with something the world could not explain. She once wrote, "God alone is enough." But those words were not born from peace. They came from years of struggle, doubt, and the aching silence that visits every soul serious about prayer. Teresa knew what it was to kneel in the dark and feel nothing. She knew how it felt to beg heaven for comfort and hear no reply. It was in those dry, silent seasons that she learned what prayer really is. Not a feeling but a friendship. Not the search for miracles but the surrender of the will. She discovered that even when the soul feels abandoned, God is nearer than breath itself, waiting behind the closed doors of our distractions, whispering, "Let me in." And when Teresa finally let him in, when she stopped trying to control her spiritual life and began to simply love, everything changed. The cold stone cell became a cathedral. The silence became music. The invisible presence of Christ filled her with a peace so deep that even her sisters could sense it when she walked by. She began to see that every human heart is a castle made of light, vast, radiant, filled with hidden rooms, and at the very center dwells the King himself. But most of us, she said, never reach the center because we get lost in the noise of the outer walls. Fear, vanity, distraction, and self-will. So on this day, October 15th, Teresa invites you to begin your own journey inward. To step away from the noise and take a single step toward that hidden fire within you. You don't have to feel worthy. You don't have to know how to pray perfectly. You only have to desire God. She would tell you that this desire itself is already prayer. Because the moment the soul turns even slightly toward the light, heaven notices. And the King who waits in the innermost chamber of your heart begins to rise and walk toward you. This is the secret Teresa lived and died proclaiming. God is not far away. He is already inside you, waiting to be remembered. It was in the year 1554 when everything changed. Teresa was 39 years old, weary from illness, disillusioned with herself, and quietly convinced that her best years of prayer were already behind her. That evening she entered the convent chapel, not out of devotion but out of habit. She was tired of pretending to be holy, tired of the endless struggle between the world's noise and God's silence. The flickering candles threw soft shadows on the statue of the wounded Christ. A simple image carved in wood, nothing remarkable. And yet, as she lifted her eyes to it, something pierced her soul. She would later write, "When I looked upon him so full of pain, I felt that he looked at me with love so great that my heart could not bear it." In that moment the saint was born. Teresa fell to her knees and began to weep, not out of sorrow but from a sudden knowing. that Christ had been waiting for her all along. That his silence was not absence but invitation. The experience did not lift her out of humanity. It plunged her deeper into it. She still felt weakness, temptation, distraction, but now everything was different. The world was lit from within. The smallest act, when done with love, became an altar. From that night on, she lived in what she called the gentle captivity of love. She realized that prayer was not escape. It was union. She stopped searching for God in distant places and began to meet him in her daily duties. Sweeping the floors, tending the sick, comforting her sisters. She would say to them, "He walks among the pots and pans too." That night of awakening became the key to her entire teaching. That holiness is not about doing more but about being more present. That God does not demand grand gestures, only a heart turned toward him, even in the smallest act. And it was from that humble awareness that Teresa's greatest miracles began to unfold. Because the soul that finally understands that God is near becomes unstoppable. On October 15th, as the Church remembers her entry into eternity, Teresa offers you that same awakening. She whispers from beyond time, "Look at him once, truly look, and your whole life will change." After that night, Teresa's life no longer belonged to herself. The quiet nun of Avila was about to become a thunderstorm of grace. God began to move through her in ways she had never imagined, and it terrified her. She started to experience what she called interior locutions, moments when she would hear the voice of Christ in her soul, speaking words too intimate for imagination. At first she thought she was deceived. She feared she was losing her mind. Even her confessors doubted her. The church of her time was cautious. A woman claiming visions could be silenced or worse. But Teresa never sought visions. She only sought truth. So she tested every word she heard with humility, obedience, and prayer. She would kneel before her crucifix and say, "Lord, if this is you, let it make me more humble. If not, let it disappear." And that is how heaven chose her voice. Not because she was perfect, but because she was obedient to love. Her words began to carry weight. Not the weight of intellect but the gravity of lived experience. People who listened to her felt something stir in their souls. A deep remembrance that they too were made for union with God. Teresa never pretended to be extraordinary. She laughed at herself often, calling her mind a wild horse and her emotions a battlefield. Yet her writings glowed with clarity, because she spoke from the place where heaven and weakness meet. She wrote, "Prayer does not consist in thinking much but in loving much." And that one line has guided countless souls out of confusion and into simplicity. That's why on her feast day, October 15th, the prayer you say with her carries special power, because you are joining the echo of her voice that still moves through time. The Church canonized her words, but heaven still amplifies them. When you pray with her, you are not speaking alone. You are standing beside a woman whose heart has never stopped burning, whose intercession still reaches the corners of human despair. Teresa would tell you that even if you can only whisper, "Lord, help me to love you more," that prayer will be multiplied through her. Because every act of love, however small, becomes infinite when united to a soul already ablaze with divine fire. So when you pray on October 15th, don't strain to be eloquent. Just love. She will take care of the rest. To the world, October 15th might look like any other day, the turning of autumn leaves, another page on the calendar. But in heaven it is a day marked in gold. It is the day Teresa was released from time and entered the fullness of love she had long desired. The Church calls it her feast day, but Teresa would call it her day of union. The moment when all the longing, the labor, and the tears of her earthly journey dissolved into the eternal embrace of God. And because she now lives in that perfect union, her love is no longer bound by distance or years. On this day she intercedes more powerfully than ever. The saints are not spectators. They are participants in God's mercy. And when you honor them, you awaken their mission again upon the earth. Teresa once said, "When I die, I will do more for souls than I could ever do while living." And she meant it. Over the centuries, countless miracles, conversions, and healings have been attributed to her intercession on this very day. Not because she is a magician, but because she knows how to move the heart of Christ. Think of October 15th as an open door. A sacred interval when heaven leans closer, listening. When you speak Teresa's name with faith, her friendship becomes a bridge between your soul and the heart of Jesus. You might feel it as a sudden calm that replaces anxiety, a thought that arrives with clarity after confusion, or a peace that makes no sense at all, but it is real. She would call it the interior kiss of grace. And if you're wondering how to receive this grace, the answer is simple. Pray with her, not to her. Don't imagine a distant saint carved in marble. Imagine a woman beside you, warm, wise, alive with divine light, who takes your trembling hands and says, "Let us go together to the one who loves us." That is what October 15th is for. It is not just a day of remembrance. It is an invitation. A time when heaven calls your name and asks, "Will you open your heart as Teresa once did?" Because when you do, even for a moment, something begins to shift. The same fire that burned in her heart begins to flicker in yours. And slowly, gently, that flicker grows. Teresa believed that the simplest words, when spoken with love, could shake the gates of heaven. She never trusted in long or elaborate devotions. What she trusted was sincerity, the naked honesty of a soul that dares to speak to God as to a friend. On her feast day, she would have wanted you to pray not from memory but from the heart. And so she left behind a pattern, not a formula. A way of speaking that begins in humility, grows in trust, and ends in surrender. Here is how she prayed in spirit, the kind of prayer you can whisper on October 15th, when heaven is most attentive. Lord Jesus, you who were my friend and my beloved, I offer you this heart, however poor it may be. Teach me to love you not in words but in deeds. Take from me what keeps me from you and give me what draws me closer. Saint Teresa of Jesus, walk beside me now. Help me to see that God is near even when I do not feel him. Help me to pray with faith, to love with courage, to surrender without fear. Let this day be my beginning again. Amen. That is all. No complex ritual, no striving. Just honesty. Teresa taught that when we pray like this, with affection and truth, something always happens even if we do not see it. The heart begins to turn quietly toward the center where God waits. And when that happens, grace flows in ways the mind cannot measure. A soul that prays sincerely is like a window suddenly opened to sunlight. The air changes. The shadows lose power. Teresa often said that prayer is an exercise of love. Think of that. Not an obligation but an exercise. Something that strengthens the soul each time it is practiced. When you pray on October 15th with her words, you are joining her exercise of love, her lifelong work of drawing heaven down into the small moments of earth. And the result? A stillness that feels like being held. A quiet knowing that God has heard you, and that somehow you have heard him too. She would smile and say, "If you can love him even a little, you have already pleased him greatly." Many people prayed with Teresa during her life, and most of them expected signs, visions, feelings, or miracles that could be seen and touched. But Teresa knew that God's most powerful answers often come wrapped in silence. She called it the language of love that has no words. There were times when she would enter the chapel and feel absolutely nothing. No sweetness in prayer, no warmth, no light. Her mind would wander, her body would ache, her heart would feel distant. Yet she stayed. She stayed because she had learned that love does not measure by emotion but by endurance. She once wrote, "It is in dryness that true friendship with God is proven." When you pray and feel nothing, she said, that is the moment to pray even more. Because faith is not proven when we see, it is proven when we trust in the dark. If you pray on October 15th and the heavens seem quiet, remember, Teresa's greatest graces were born in silence. That silence was not rejection, it was preparation. Like a seed buried in the ground, grace often grows unseen before it breaks the surface. And sometimes silence itself is the answer. Because in the quiet we stop asking for signs and start longing simply for God himself. That longing, she said, is the purest form of prayer. She knew this from experience. In her darkest season, when she was misunderstood, when her health was failing, when even her confessors doubted her, she found a strange peace. Not joy as the world gives but something deeper. Confidence without evidence. That is what she wants to give you on her feast day. Not just a passing consolation, but a steady courage that remains even when you feel nothing. If you sense only silence after your prayer, whisper to yourself what Teresa whispered in her most desolate hour. Let nothing disturb you, let nothing frighten you. All things pass, God never changes. Patience obtains all things. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone suffices. Repeat those words slowly as if she is speaking them beside you. As she is. And in that quiet endurance, you will discover the secret she spent her life teaching. That even when God is silent, he is closer than ever. Teresa never chased miracles. She believed that when a soul becomes obedient to love, miracles chase it instead. During her years of reforming the Carmelite order, she faced endless obstacles: poverty, sickness, ridicule, even persecution from within the church itself. Yet each time she surrendered her plans to God, something extraordinary would happen. Doors that seemed locked would suddenly open. Help would arrive at the very hour it was needed. Enemies would turn into allies. She wrote, "When we give everything to him, he gives himself to us." Teresa didn't call these events miracles. She called them responses to trust. She said, "God walks among the pots and pans," meaning that his grace moves quietly through ordinary circumstances when we act in faith. So when you pray on October 15th, don't look for lightning in the sky. Look for the quiet shifts, the timing that feels too perfect to be coincidence, the peace that comes before the answer, the courage to do what's right even when it's hard. Those are the miracles of obedience. Teresa saw them again and again. When the bishop refused to support her new convents, she prayed and waited. Months later, help appeared through a stranger who had dreamed of a nun asking for aid. When the sisters had no food, she blessed the empty pantry, and that very afternoon, donations arrived at the convent gate. These were not random events. They were God's way of saying, "You trusted me, now watch what I can do." And this is what she would tell you today. Obedience in small things invites heaven into great things. If you pray with her on her feast day, make one small act of obedience afterward. Forgive someone, offer a kindness, speak a gentle word you've been withholding, or give up a worry you keep returning to. Teresa would say, "Faith grows by walking." Then pay attention. Because when you act in trust, even a little, God begins to move in the background of your life. He arranges, heals, restores. Slowly, tenderly, he begins to make the impossible possible. And when you notice it, when the first quiet miracle unfolds, whisper the words Teresa said with every answered prayer: "God alone suffices." Every saint leaves a legacy, but Teresa left something even greater. A spiritual current that still moves through souls who call her name with faith. On her feast day, she is permitted, by God's mercy, to pour out particular graces upon those who seek her friendship. The mystics who followed her teachings spoke of 3 gifts that often accompany those who pray with her on October 15th. The first is peace of heart. Not the fragile calm the world gives, but a deep interior stillness that settles even when life stays complicated. Teresa said, "Peace is not found in freedom from storms, but in the presence of God within them." This peace does not erase your struggles. It steadies you within them. You begin to notice that certain worries lose their power. Fears that once ruled your thoughts now seem smaller under the light of trust. The second is clarity of purpose. Teresa often prayed, "Lord, let me see what you want and then make me want it too." On her feast day, many who pray sincerely experience a sudden understanding of what they must do next. A direction, a decision, a reconciliation long avoided. It may come quietly, like a thought that feels truer than others, but it carries peace instead of anxiety. That's how you'll know it's from God. The third gift is renewed desire for prayer. This, Teresa would say, is the greatest grace of all. Because desire is the spark of every transformation. If you find yourself drawn back to prayer after a long silence, or feeling a longing to be closer to God without knowing how, that is Teresa's hand on your shoulder. She is leading you gently back to the center of your own soul, where God waits. She once promised her sisters, "If you remember me in your prayers, I will remember you before his throne." That promise was not bound to time. It still stands today. So when you pray on October 15th, ask her for these 3 gifts: peace, clarity, and renewed desire. Don't demand them. Simply open your heart to receive them. And then wait. Because grace has its own rhythm, and when it comes, you will recognize it by its fragrance. Serenity, strength, and a quiet joy that has no earthly cause. That is how you will know that Saint Teresa of Jesus has passed by your soul, leaving, as she always did, the scent of heaven behind her. Teresa often said that the life of prayer is like walking through the rooms of an interior castle. Most people, she warned, stay only in the outer halls, those bright but noisy spaces where distractions echo and the soul forgets it is loved. But once the door to the inner chambers is opened, it never truly closes again. When you pray with Teresa on October 15th, you step across that threshold. It may feel quiet, invisible, unremarkable at first, but something eternal begins to move. The soul that remembers God even once can never completely forget him again. She wrote, "The door to the castle is prayer. Enter as you are." The king does not wait for perfect guests. That is the lasting gift of her feast, an opening that remains. Even after the candles burn low, after the day passes, the way inward stays lit. You will find in the days that follow, that moments of peace return more easily. You'll catch yourself whispering her words, "Let nothing disturb you," without even meaning to. That is grace echoing through the corridors. And when life pulls you outward again, as it always will, remember this. Prayer is not about escaping the world but about transforming it from within. Teresa prayed not to flee life but to fill it with God. She reformed convents, counseled popes, wrote books, endured criticism, and she did it all by drawing strength from those secret hours in the castle of her soul. That same strength is now offered to you. If you let it, this October 15th can become the beginning of your own reformation. Quiet, hidden, but real. A turning of the heart that will ripple through everything you touch. And when you sense it, when peace arrives in the middle of chaos, when love feels possible again, pause and thank her. Whisper, "Saint Teresa, thank you for walking with me." Because she is still walking with you. She has simply crossed to the other side of the same mystery, and from there she continues her work. One soul at a time, one prayer at a time, until the whole world remembers that God alone suffices. And now, before this time with her ends, take a moment to make her prayer your own. Speak it softly from the heart. Saint Teresa of Jesus, teach me to live each day from the center of love. Help me to trust the silence, to see God in the ordinary, and to never close the door you have opened in me. Amen. And if these moments with her have touched you, if you felt peace or longing or hope, stay close. Here on Timeless Wisdom of Saint Teresa, we keep her voice alive, we walk the same path, and we learn together how to turn prayer into friendship with God. So subscribe not out of habit, but as a quiet act of devotion, to keep the flame burning, and to let the wisdom of Saint Teresa remind you again and again. Let nothing disturb you. God alone suffices. There was a calm over Teresa in the last days of her life that no pain could break. Her body was failing, her breath was short, and yet those who stood beside her said it felt as if heaven was already in the room. She spoke little, but when she did, her words came like sunlight through a window, warm, steady, full of meaning. One of her sisters asked, "Mother, are you afraid?" Teresa smiled faintly and whispered, "Afraid of meeting the one I have loved all my life?" Then she turned her gaze toward the crucifix and said the words that became her final prayer. "At last, my beloved, the hour has come. Let us go together." That is the secret she left to the world. Not a theology but a way of dying and living. To go with him together. Not alone, not fighting, not grasping, just going with Christ in peace. And so every October 15th the heavens remember that moment. The instant when love overcame fear. When the soul that had sought God through silence finally found herself within his embrace. That is why her presence feels so close on this day. It is not memory, it is continuation. Her love never ended. It expanded. This is what she would say to you now, live as if today were your feast day too. She would remind you that holiness isn't about escaping ordinary life, but about sanctifying it, turning laundry, work, conversations, even pain into offerings of love. She'd tell you that prayer is not for the few. It is the inheritance of everyone who dares to believe that God desires them. And maybe tonight, as you sit quietly after hearing her story, you'll sense something gentle in the air, a peace that seems to come from beyond you, yet feels at home in your heart. That's her. Saint Teresa of Jesus, the restless girl of Ávila who became a doctor of the Church, is still moving through the world, searching for souls willing to begin again. If you hear her invitation, answer it. Pray with her. Walk with her. Let her teach you to love simply, to trust deeply, and to rest in God without fear. Because that is her final wisdom. That life, every bit of it, from laughter to suffering, from longing to fulfillment, is the long conversation between the soul and the one who created it. And if you let her, Teresa will walk beside you until that conversation ends, not in silence, but in the eternal words she herself once spoke. God alone suffices.